our program presenter who I'll introduce. I know this is the first time that VAR, our chapter, has well, there's been an in-person meeting and a online register. So we may have people from all over the United States in here today watching our program. This is a test program, and we appreciate everybody's patience and willingness to go along with something new today. So I will be acting as regent today, as our vice regent has child problems this morning, which is she's the mother. So we'll be thinking of her today. But by the virtue of the authority invested in me as regent of the annual Caretakers Chapter of the National Society, Daughters of the American Revolution, I now declare this meeting in session. Does anyone have a gavel? Bang, bang. Thank you. Perpetuate the memory and the spirit of the men and women who achieved American independence, to promote the development of an enlightened public opinion, and to foster patriotic citizenship. These are the objects of our National Society, Daughters of the American Revolution. Everyone could please stand if you are able. Kathleen.
Dark declaration committed to your trust, 1 Timothy 6:20.
Yea, I have a goodly heritage.
You shall remember all the ways which the Lord your God has led you.
Blessed is the nation whose God is Lord.
Our Father in heaven, we thank you for your abiding presence in the life of our country. Thank you for all those yesterdays of our human race, whose lessons and fulfillments have become a heritage to us. Continue, we pray, your blessings upon this nation, and all who are part of it may learn true nobility of mankind and womanhood. Grant us growth in understanding and increasing devotion to righteousness. In your holy name, we pray.
Amen. Henry, would you lead us to the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America? And Anne, can you share your book with her? I knew I recognized you in that now. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic which stands one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And do I have a volunteer to lead us in the American Street? Thank you, Amber. United States of America, as the government of the people, by the people, for the people, whose just powers are derived from the consent of the government. Democracy and republic, the sovereign nation, of sovereign states, in perfect union, one and inseparable, established upon those principles of freedom, equality, justice, and humanity, for which American patriots sacrifice their lives and fortunes. I therefore believe it is my duty to my country to love it, to support its Constitution, to obey its laws, to respect its flag, and to defend it against all enemies. Thank you. I want to welcome you here today. This is something that a program we've wanted to have for a long time. Most of you are probably familiar with the fact that we have a national cemetery in Southern Illinois, but not everyone is. And not everyone has been there. But I can tell you it is a jewel of a place to visit. How many in this room have been there? Okay, very good. In fact, one of our members, or I guess former member, she's now moved on, Pam Montague, her husband is buried there. And it's a cemetery full of very old graves, people who fought in the Civil War on both sides. If you go there, you will find a lot of peace and quiet. It's in the middle of kind of, I don't want to say nowhere because Mound City is somewhere, but it's not in the city. It's out in a rural area, and it's just a gorgeous place to visit, especially this time of year. So we're going to hear a little bit about the history of the Mound City National Cemetery, and we're very pleased today to have with us Richard Panicki, and he is a member of the board of the commissioners of the National Cemetery, and I'm sure he has a lot more history, but I'm going to let him talk about that. So,
great.
Welcome.
Thank you very much. Okay. Well, thank you very, very much. It's a pleasure to be here. I was telling the lady earlier that when I talk about this to my family, they kind of glaze over and look off into the distance, you know, because it's not that interesting to them, but I think it's a fascinating story. And I know that you all are history minded, so hopefully you'll agree that it is. I've been with the commission since 2009. I produced a documentary for them back then in order to show to people that visited the cemetery. It's like a welcome video, talks about the Civil War and everything. The commission sells it to raise funds, and they've sold probably 1,000 copies. The video did air on WSIU TV, and I'm very, very proud of my work with the commission. But what's so important to understand is that I would not know anything if it had not been for my trip to the National Archives, where I dug into the files related to the cemetery and was completely taken. And at that point, my passion ignited, and I have not looked back. And so today you're going to get like the tops 1% of the story. I could stand here for 4 hours and talk about this because I've learned so much about it over the years. It truly is a remarkable story. So with that in mind, let's begin, shall we? It is located in Pulaski County, Illinois, right there on the Ohio River. A lovely place, about a mile from Mound City. It's off Interstate 57, take exit 8, and it's about an hour from Carpenter. Here's an aerial shot, and there's the cemetery, of course. And there's your Ohio River, and we love this shot because it does show the Ohio and the cemetery as well. And then there's Route 37 and old US 51. There you go. Let's start with some background. The cemetery is administered by the National Cemetery Administration through its Jefferson Barracks office. It is a satellite cemetery with all of the administrators in St. Louis. They're the ones that are responsible for its maintenance and upkeep and so forth. It is a government facility. It's federal property. So, there are this many burials, 8,660 as of October 28th. And there are 65 burials a year, which is relatively few, especially when you consider Jefferson Barracks, which has that many a week in some cases. We have burials from the Mexican-American War all the way to Afghanistan, Iraq, and Middle East events. 5,500 of these burials are Civil War era. And of course, 2,700 of those are unknowns, and I'll talk a little bit more about them later. So there you have it, 60% are Civil War era burials. There are 155 national cemeteries throughout the United States and 34 soldiers' lots. Does anyone know what a soldier's lot is? It's a cluster of military burials within a civilian cemetery. So they're making a huge city cemetery somewhere, and in that space are 500 military burials together. We have the second largest number of national cemeteries of any state in the union. Virginia has 15, California has 10, and I suspect over the years California will continue to build more cemeteries and therefore will surpass Illinois. But I thought that's really interesting, and that's been there for a long time that Illinois has had 11 and Virginia 15. When I started studying the national cemeteries, The United States had about 134, so we continue to add burial space. And half of all national cemeteries date from the Civil War, which I think is really important to understand. Here's the Illinois National Cemeteries. I'll just run through these very quickly for you. There's Abraham Lincoln in Elwood, Alton, Camp Butler, Springfield, Danville, Fort Sheridan, Lake Forest, Quincy, Rock Island, Confederate Mound, Chicago, North Alton Confederate Cemetery, and the Rock Island Confederate Cemetery. Of course, those were cemeteries related to prisoner of war camps in Illinois. Abraham Lincoln has 900 acres. It's a relatively new cemetery. That's as big as the SIU campus, just for comparison purposes. And the smallest are Alton, Quincy with a ½ acre each. That's small. We cover 14 acres in Mound City. And let's see, Mound City was established as a national cemetery in 1864. And Camp Butler, 1862, is one of the original 14 national cemeteries. And that's an area of confusion. Some folks think Mound City was one of the original, it wasn't. However, I think that the Camp Butler managers were also in charge of Mound City for a little while. And I think that's where the confusion comes from. But based on my informal research, I believe we were the 29th national cemetery established in this country. And, before it was a national cemetery, you'll see reference to this later, it was called the Soldiers Cemetery. Now, the reason why we have a national cemetery is because a mile away on the banks of the Ohio River during the Civil War stood this building. It was a hospital. And it was one of the largest hospitals in the Western Theater of War. It could treat up to 1,500 patients at once. It was not in place until 1862. And at that time, it received a lot of the casualties from Fort Donelson and later, of course, Shiloh in April 1862. But it was occupied throughout the war, a significant, important place for medical care in the Western Theater of War. The Sisters of the Holy Cross were the nurses in the building and taking care of the soldiers. They're from Notre Dame, Indiana. They were asked by their governor to come to Mound City and Cairo to help take care of the soldiers from Indiana. And as a result, they went from educators, which is what they were primarily doing in Notre Dame, to nurses, and became the forerunners of the Navy Nurse Corps, actually. And then, of course, we had the Red River Hospital ship, which was a Confederate barracks that was confiscated in Battle of Island Number 10. And then it was outfitted as a floating hospital. There were many, many boats like that. But the Red River was significant in that it did transport a lot of its patients to Mound City for treatment. So this is a map of the downtown area, riverfront of Mound City during the Civil War. Here's your hospital. And then this area here represents the Naval Depot, a cluster of buildings, 20 buildings or so, for the purpose of taking care of the Navy boats. Over there is the Marine Ways. I'll talk a little bit more about that later, but that's where they actually pulled boats out of the water, would repair them, and then put them back in the water. There's cradles, or you'll see the what they call rails. And at that location, they built these 3 gunboats, part of the Navy's Brown Water Navy. These boats were built specifically for warfare in the Mississippi, Ohio, Cumberland, Tennessee River valleys. They only took up 6 feet of draft, which is critical, of course, in the rivers, especially back then. They had enormous firepower. And actually, the Caro is the one that sank in the Yazoo River in 1862. It's been taken out of the river and set up as a museum piece at the Vicksburg National Military Park. So if you ever want to see the Caro, you can go to Vicksburg and see it. These other gunboats saw enormous amounts of service, received unbelievable casualties. Mound City took a plunging shot to its boilers, scalded steam and water, killed over 100 of its crew one day. So all these boats sank at least once and were recovered. And they were built in Mound City. 4 other ones were built in Carondelet, which was a boatyard near St. Louis. And James Eads was the engineer in charge of their construction. And the Eads Bridge in St. Louis is something he built as well. And he is a story for another day. But anyway, this is what these are two very important images of the boatyard or the shipyard of Mound City during the Civil War. And they show some of the buildings that existed. Very busy area, and was visited repeatedly after multiple battles involving the gunboats. They'd have to always go back and get repairs in Mound City or somewhere like Memphis, for example. So the war is over, and there are 79 national cemeteries in this country. And it's at this point that the government then decides we need to initiate a program to recover the remains of those who've been buried in post battlefield cemeteries. You know, they're just all over the countryside, literally. And there's this area is no exception. There we go. So here we go to the National Archives, and this document is just a handwritten scrawled note, but it depicts what's going on, and that is the government is curious as to how much room there is in Mound City to take burials from throughout the area and move them to the National Cemetery. So they're making decisions as they go along here. Maybe I could read some of that and it can help you. So he's referencing this note, they're referencing a government order that was established calling for what, as to the extent of accommodations, unoccupied accommodations at the Soldiers Cemetery at Carroll, Mound City, Illinois, and the cost of acreage and so forth. So they're making all these decisions. Can we, remove these bodies from all these remote locations and bring them to Mound City? He's estimating about 1,000 in this note. So we're fast forward now to 1866. All these national cemeteries had to be inspected every year, and this is what they used. And it's a pretty remarkable document, actually, from my perspective, in terms of my love of the history of this place. So the total number of interments are not known at Mound City at this time in 1866. Besides U.S. soldiers had been buried here, they had U.S. sailors, they had citizens, refugees, and contrabands. The actual number of soldiers buried here is unknown. We also know that, according to this, the cemetery just didn't look like it does today because it was basically deposited bodies there. And wherever there was room, they would bury somebody. And so what they're talking about here is that there's forest trees, and it's overgrown with the weeds 6 to 8 feet in length. It is subject to overflow because the river's right there. They have seawater problems for many, many generations, actually. And so now this document shows you where the bodies are going to be recovered from. Now, these are soldiers who died of disease. They were buried in post burial sites like Fort Holt, Kentucky, America. There's a brickyard between Mound City and Cairo. Cairo has some, and they go down the list: Commerce, Missouri, Columbus, Kentucky, Paducah. And then, anyway, these are all the locations where they're from. As of this, when this document was written, there were that many burials, nearly 5,000 burials. So this is what's happening, and let's go and keep talking. This photograph is really important. I collect images, I collect postcards, I collect pictures of the cemetery, and this is so important because this photograph was taken in March of 1900, and the reason we find that this is so important is because the census enumerator was there 2 months before this picture was taken. So it took a little work, but we figured out who it was. And this is the cemetery superintendent. His name is William Dillon. And he was a veteran of the Civil War. You had to be a veteran and a disabled veteran in order to be a superintendent of the National Cemetery. According to his family, Mr. Dillon was wounded in the Battle of Gettysburg and laid on the battlefield for 3 days before he was treated. And according to the census, that's his wife, Emma. And then his daughter, that's his daughter, Emma over there, and I forgot her name. And it's so rare to find photographs of people in the National Cemetery from that long ago. But here we have something from the spring of 1900, which I just truly treasure this image. There's a couple of others in this sequence. But this is terrific. And the superintendents were really important people in the community. They were looked up to, they made a little bit of money. We'll talk about the superintendent before this gentleman, but so that photograph showed you the original headstones that were put in the National Cemetery. They were really short, only about 13 inches tall. But 3 years after that photo was taken, this was to become the official headstone for National Cemeteries. It's called the Civil War type, much taller. It has the bas relief with the unit or the number of the grave, along with the individual and where they're from. Those are the oldest headstones you'll see at the National Cemetery. And then, of course, we have the unknown burials. These are the upright that were put into the cemetery in the 1930s as part of a works project program. And then the 6 by 6 inch block. Those are the original unknown markers of the National Cemetery. Now, back to the unknowns. It was in the Battle of Belmont. How many of you have heard of the Battle of Belmont? That was one of the first ones, an amphibious landing done by U.S. Grant, attacked a Confederate camp in the Missouri side of the river from Columbus, Kentucky. And there were 120 Americans or federal troops that were killed in that battle. They were buried there, and their headstones, our head markers, were placed. We knew who they were by those who buried them. But then over the years, during the Civil War, before they were moved, there was the river flooded and washed away their headstones and their markers. Head markers, not headstones. And so when the government contractor who was hired to move all these bodies to Mound City went to that burial site, the only way he knew where to dig was by depressions in the topsoil. And then, of course, they were unknown. But when you see these burials out in Mound City, 120 of them probably come from Belmont, Missouri. And that battlefield, by the way, is long gone. It's been washed away by the river. USCT stands for United States Colored Troops. There are several hundred of those burials in Mound City, and I want to learn a lot more about them over the course of the next few weeks and months. I'm going to do more study. That's one of the original headstones. It's so interesting because of the way it looks. It's kind of, you can tell how it was carved and so forth. There's a close-up of a USCT burial. And then we have Confederate burials. We had 47 Confederates buried in Mound City. These gentlemen were died as prisoners of war, probably in the hospital down by the river. And here they are buried together. They have, of course, the pointed top and the Southern Cross represented there. 47, I've heard 27, 47. At some point in the near future, we're going to do a census at the National Cemetery. We're going to count. Literally count each one manually, figure out exactly how many we have. Get rid of any dispute on that. Close up of the mark. So then here we have what's called the general type headstone. This headstone was introduced right after World War I, and it is representative of all the burials since then. The government made multiple decisions over time relating to these headstones, what could be put on them. As you can see now, we have the birth and death dates, the individual, of course, he was a Marine, and he served in Korea. So this burial also has a significant interest to me because a gentleman I recently met who was hired by families to clean out houses of individuals who passed. And he was cleaning out a house in Mounds and found a box of photographs, of metal, and letters that related to this gentleman. And he contacted our commission and said, would you all be interested in these objects? And I said, heck yeah, for sure. And we have yet to take possession of them, but he earned the Distinguished Service Cross, which is the third highest award you can get in the Marine Corps, behind the Navy Cross and behind the Medal of Honor, of course. I think there's one more award, and then the Distinguished Service Cross. He was part of a company, was detached from a larger group, and put in a position where they were literally surrounded by the Chinese. And I can only imagine the horror that this gentleman went through toward the end of his life. But he has an incredible story, and I can't wait to tell more about that because that's what I like to do is describe those stories and so forth, his life and whatnot. Many people know his family. But the family was not interested in those objects. Interestingly enough, when the individual told them about the objects, he basically they said, never mind, we don't care anymore. But our goal is to preserve that information and take good care of it. This is another type of headstone. There are a lot of families who have loved ones who never came back from the war, that were lost, they're missing in action. My mother's brother was killed in the South Pacific. He was a fighter pilot aboard the USS Lexington. He was killed in an accident aboard the boat and buried at sea. Well, I had if I want to, I can create one of these or have one of these made in his memory and put up at the Jefferson Barracks National Cemetery, which is where his family lived. There are about 4 or 5 of these at the National Cemetery in Mound City, but it is available to us, and I really like that idea. So some sort of marker to remember those who didn't come home and were missing in action. It is a remarkable place. If you're a photographer, it's an incredible place to visit because every time the light changes, it changes what it looks like. It's just a terrific place to do photography and at the same time learn about history and so forth. And I have to be very honest with you that when I visit this place, I don't think about myself anymore. I'm thinking about these individuals, what they went through, their lives, and so forth. These are the most, this gentleman's probably the most famous burial we have. Turchin and John Basil Turkey, who's a general, served, commanded the 19th Illinois Infantry. And this is his wife, Ruby. And she traveled with him in camp and was, and as a result, he was court-martialed and dismissed from the military. She appealed to Abraham Lincoln, who she knew. Lincoln countermanded the dismissal, promoted Basil to brigadier general. So it helps to know people, right? He had dementia toward the end of his life, died at the Mental Health Center, which I don't think it was called that back in the day, but that's where he died. And he died in Vienna. She lived a few years, had a military pension of $30 a month. And, there's stories about her too, how she commanded his soldiers. And when he was sick, he would get headaches. And he was in a wagon, currently being just unable to command. And she took over the troops. She didn't lead them into battle, but she was able to give them orders and help them keep order, if you will. He's also accused of allowing his troops to sack Athens, Alabama, which actually the history website about Alabama, they go into great detail about that. Alabama's not happy with this guy, so they still show that today. Talk about that today. This is one of my most favorite, most interesting burials. His name was Thomas A. Fitzpatrick. He was a superintendent of the National Cemetery for 16 years. He fought in the Battle of Gettysburg. He's part of the 18th Pennsylvania Volunteer Cavalry. And his story is remarkable. He is just remarkable. And he, of course, was disabled. He was, these were all the battles he fought, and it's hard to see. But he was wounded at White Oak Swamp in 1864. His wounding is actually mentioned in the regimental history because the bullet went down the barrel of his rifle, blew up his stock, took off the 2 middle fingers of his hand, and blew out some muscles in his arm. They take him to the surgeon's tent. The surgeon says, "Okay, are you ready? We're going to remove the arm." He pulled out a revolver and put it on his stomach and said, "Nope, you're not going to touch my arm. You're not going to take it off. You're going to wrap it up, and that's that." And sure enough, he survived. I'm sure he had a fever, but he survived and went on actually in his life and played fiddle. So interesting character, but unfortunately, on June 29th, he was shot and killed by a disgruntled cemetery worker at the National Cemetery. He was shot point blank with a shotgun and killed. This is only a handful of the articles I found in newspapers all over the country. He was much revered. He was loved. There's an article in the Carroll newspaper that I had a hard time reading, but they just gush all over in terms of how remarkable this man was. He had a great sense of humor. He was very generous. So the gentleman who killed him, his name is Tobin, Tobin. He took off. He ran off. They assembled a posse with hound dogs and went after him. Okay. Well, they came back and said they couldn't find him apparently. But 5 months later, they find Tobin's skeleton in the woods. And anyway, they say he killed himself. Okay, well, there you go. That's what happened, and very tragic story for Fitzpatrick, of course. And Tobin, but apparently he was committed suicide. Apparently, that's what they said. So, we'll leave it at that. This is I show you to talk about these burials because they're so obvious when you enter the cemetery. A lot of people go directly to this stone and want to know about it. Well, that's Charles Batier. He's mayor of Cairo, very, very influential in politics, part of the Grand Army of the Republic, which was a very influential program or a group at that second half of the 19th century. He was a captain of the Missouri 8th, I believe, fought in all kinds of battles. And, part of Sherman's March to the Sea. Very interesting and probably not a friend of Fitzpatrick. He and Fitzpatrick were good friends. And the story goes that he put this here to counter Fitzpatrick's headstone. Right? I don't know if that's true. I would love to confirm that, but that's what one of the family members told me about that. I actually didn't meet him, but I met him online. Yeah, one of the great nephews of Thomas Fitzpatrick. He referred to Batier's burial site as kind of a one-off signature. You know what I mean? Trying to up a little bit. This is the Caretakers Lodge. This was built in 1880, designed by Montgomery Meigs, who was the quartermaster general at the time. It has 3 rooms below, 3 rooms above. And in the back is a kitchen area that was replaced in the 1930s, originally wood. That's what it looks like in 1900. This is one of those other images I referenced. There's the couple of the girls in here are the Dillon's daughters. That's what it looks like. And then this is what it looks like in a postcard, maybe 5 years later. And there's the superintendent there. I don't know his name. Love to know, but I don't. So that's what that looks like. This is our roster. This is where we hold our Memorial Day observance every year, typically, unless there's COVID and we don't want us in the cemetery. This was built in 1930. It replaced this roster, which was cast iron and wood. Just to, got worn out. The cemetery flooded a couple of times. And the wood was pretty much deteriorated, so they replaced it. The Soldiers and Sailors Memorial was built in 1875. There's 8 marble panels that list every name of every individual buried in the cemetery at that time. It's 55 feet. Box of Liberty is at the top of the shaft. And the soldier and sailor, there she is, it's 9 feet tall. These are the soldier and the soldier and sailor that are at the base. Beautiful. But the Goddess of Liberty fell off the top of the monument back in the 60s and broke. This is a photograph that was captured by an SIU student and shared with me online. The Goddess of Liberty is gone. And it was replaced and brought from Italy to the United States. The first Goddess of Liberty was lost in transport in shipment. And then the second one came, of course, and that's the one we see today. So that's pretty remarkable. The boat yard that I referred to earlier continued to operate in Mound City up through the 1960s. This is a representation of the river boats that were brought in and we worked on, including the Robert E. Lee, was repaired in Mound City multiple times. It was one of the biggest boats that they worked on, weighed about 800 tons. That's a typical site that you would see if you were on the riverfront of Mound City anytime after the Civil War up through the 20s, I guess. And then after that, the boats look a little bit different. Today, this is what you see. And this is from my drone. But these are the rails. Now, these rails were put here in the 1880s. The original Civil War rails are probably down here somewhere. The Ohio River has raised over the years. It's a lot deeper now than it was back then. So that's what they had to do, to move the rails up higher in the bank and then elevating them. This is the hospital as it was seen in the early 1970s. It became a furniture manufacturing facility. used as a tanning plant. Then it was abandoned pretty much, and the state of Illinois was going to buy it and was going to make a Civil War, destination, because that would be pretty spectacular to have that. Unfortunately, it burned in May 1976. Arson burned that hospital and destroyed any opportunity for holding on to that heritage from city to city. It's a sad, sad story for the mayor of the community, who was really, really big on trying to get that recognized and Civil War heritage recognized. That would be an economic benefit for the city. This is our headquarters for the Preservation Commission. This is the oldest house in Mound City. It was built in 1854 by the founder of Mound City, Moses Rawlings. There's a museum in it. And right now we're working with our architect to build an ADA compliant bathroom. So that's ongoing, and hopefully we'll get there soon. We found a plumber, we have the plans, and so we're going to keep moving in the direction of trying to preserve the history of Mound City. We have a little museum, just a couple of cases and things. I'm working to build a library for it. We have about 400 or 500 book library potential. But there it is, and you all are invited. Once we get open to the public, which hopefully will be real soon. And of course, the Wreaths across America is why I'm also here today. I love this concept because it adds color to a cemetery. It is very colorless, quite frankly, during the winter months. And it just looks beautiful. The goal this year, of course, ongoing, is to have all 8,600 burials with a wreath. We're focusing on the unknowns in our within the Preservation Commission. But it's a beautiful moment, and something that's really, I think, worthy. It kind of adds to the Memorial Day work that we do. We do provide the observance, as I mentioned earlier, of Memorial Day. And I think it was so important, is the ability just to remember, just to think about somebody, read their name, understand where they, how they, what time frame they lived, and then just think about them. And I think that's really important. Of course, that's what we do with Wreaths Across America. So thank you. That's it. I'll take questions. I don't know how long I went. I know I wanted to keep it like 20, 25. Okay. So do you have a question? Anybody?
I don't have a question, but would you mind repeating the question so that people
Absolutely.
can hear it?
Yes, of course. Yes, ma'am.
Are they going to do a Wreaths Across America this year for COVID or no?
Yes, December 18th is the date. It's a Saturday, I believe, and I think it's like 10 o'clock in the morning. Yes. Yes, ma'am.
I noticed there were a lot of trees in the older cemetery.
Yes.
What was the thinking? Why would they remove?
Yeah. So of course they died. I mean, they were just, but they're also very. Why? The question is why aren't there more trees in the National Cemetery? And the question before was, when is the Wreaths Across America program? And I said December 18th. The reason is I speculate that they're very, very destructive to the cemetery. They can actually move headstones. They fall and break things. I know that they've worked really hard to kind of trim things back occasionally. So it's one of those things that, the trees that are there, they're good to go, but otherwise they've been removed and to prevent them from falling, I think. Would be it. Yes, ma'am.
The very you mentioned,
I'm sorry.
how war was the
Oh, Korea. That would be the Korean. What war was the individual in who's I talked about earlier, Clyde? I think his name was Jewel, and he was in the Korean War, served as a Marine. I could keep going for a couple of hours if you want. I mean, I probably have other things you were allowed to do this Saturday. But if you have any, yes, ma'am.
I noticed that it seemed like it was a really good idea to convert that hospital into a Civil War museum, and possibly an heritage museum relating to the river or Mound City.
Mhm.
I know the building is gone. Are there any thoughts with this new Build Back Better
Right.
America funds that Sound City might get the funds to build a museum?
So possibly, I don't know for sure. I know the mayor is really helpful and has been terrific to work with, but I don't know. I should find out. But what I think we could do is build a replica, not necessarily the full thing, but maybe a building that is enough of a replica to talk about medical history as well as the history of the community. Mound City is an economically depressed town. There's less than 600 people who live there, and they have very, very few opportunities. And you know, you look at, for example, I was thinking about the other day, Chester, Illinois, and its connection to Popeye. Okay, that's great, and it's unbelievable what they've done. But something like that could, I think, could happen. Maybe. It would take a significant effort. I mean, the mayor tried to do it back in the 70s, and he failed. So, but I'll ask and find out. I'm really interested in learning.
So how close is Caro to Mounds?
Yes, how close is Caro to Mound City? It's 6 miles.
So with that new
Yeah,
thing that they're putting in there. Yeah.
or
Yes,
Yeah.
the port, won't that be helpful?
I'm hopeful, maybe. I think so. Absolutely. In fact, the riverfront in Mound City is going to be more, it's going to be very busy as well, as I understand it. That area that I showed you will have a business operating there and cleaning out barges, I think is what they were talking about. So things are going to happen, hopefully. And they have a TIF district down there now, so we can hope. We can certainly hope. Yes, ma'am.
We had a comment from the chat that says from Marissa Clanahan.
Yes.
She said that the Wreaths Across America program starts at 11, not
Yes.
10.
Okay. Marissa Clanahan is the vice president of the commission. She corrects me that the program starts at 11 and not 10. Thank you, Marissa. Appreciate it very much. Yes, sir.
Will the program this year include volunteers being able to take wreaths around to the grave as well as to watch a cemetery, a memorial at the
Sure.
memorial center?
So the question is, can volunteers show up and help place the wreaths? And the answer is yes. I believe I'm correct on that. Marissa will correct me if I'm not, but I'm pretty sure I am. So absolutely, because we're going to have to carry them throughout the cemetery and we need volunteers for that, for sure. Yes,
Do
ma'am.
you have to do you have to let you know who's coming?
Well, I don't know, but I don't think that's a problem, quite frankly. Marissa will tell me, but the question, Marissa, is do people have to let us know they're coming? And I don't think so. So she'll correct me again on that. Yes.
I know last year our chapter donated $500.
Oh, my. That's
So we
awesome.
collected from our membership and then we pulled it all together and sent it to you all for
Fantastic. Thank you.
Across America. And we're planning to do the same thing
Well, thank you.
this year, ladies, if,
That's
for
awesome.
those who are able to contribute. And I think this year your goal is to have a wreath on every grave, including the unknown.
Yes. Absolutely.
I think that would be a wonderful thing to happen. And in addition, Wreaths Across America is the state regents, one of the state regents projects for the year. So hopefully this will be a good year for you.
Thank you very, very much. Most appreciated. And absolutely, that's our goal, especially the unknown soldiers who I think deserve a wreath. Absolutely. Yes.
Marissa commented that they need as many volunteers as they can get. Yes, volunteers are needed, so I don't think you have to let them know how many people.
Thank you, Marissa. Yeah, volunteers, please come on. As many as we can get would be great. You don't have to tell us you're coming in advance. Okay.
Well, I think we ought to Give you a hand.
Oh, thank you. I really appreciate it.
Okay, so that closes the program part of our meeting today, and we really appreciate the efforts of the Carbondale Public Library and Jennifer Robertson for helping us set this up. We'll see how it goes, and we'll see what kind of comments we get. And every time we do one of these things, just like when we first did our Zoom meetings, we learned a lot. So anyway, I think this will be available for viewing on the library site. So if you have DAR friends or other ladies that say, oh, shoot, I wish I could have been there. But I can't think of a better way to have celebrated Veterans Day or Veterans Day week. I was fortunate enough to get to go to Diana Memorial on Thursday, I guess it was, and it was raining, and so it was all pulled inside the library, so we were stuck in there like little sardines, but it was a wonderful program, and I hope everybody got to go to some sort of Veterans Day program. If not, this one's very good. So, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Does anyone have any announcements to make for the chapter? Any reports that we need to hear? This would conclude the program section of our of the day. Okay.